everyone, and welcome back to Camp Create. In today's activity, we are going to be creating some fun backgrounds using some stencils, but by all means, you can do any type of technique you want for this activity. You would just want to create some really fun background looks and make those the focus of your card. So I have some stencils that I've picked out, and we're going to go ahead and start to create all of our backgrounds. So we're starting with the geometric grid stencil, and I also have a sheet from my Smart Grid paper pad that I'm going to put underneath of me so that I can protect my work surface while I add some fun rainbow color to all of these backgrounds. So I'm adhering my panel down onto my work surface just to make sure that it doesn't shift at all while I'm doing any of the inking. We are adding a great deal of ink through these stencils, and I really want to make sure nothing shifts, because there's nothing worse than getting almost to the end of your inking technique and then having that stencil move and wrecking your complete background. So I definitely recommend taking the time to first adhere your panel and then adhere your stencil over top. Now this stencil is completely covering our background piece, so we're going to have a little bit of area on each side where we have that tape, but don't worry about that because we are going to trim this down a tiny bit, so we're going to remove that part where we have a little bit of white detail. So for each of the backgrounds, I'm going to add some rainbow color just because I really love the look of rainbow on a background, but feel free to mix it up and use any colors that you'd like. It's just kind of laying down the color and getting that stencil design into our background. So for this first one, I'm going to start and do a complete rainbow from one end of my panel to the other. So I'm starting on the right bottom corner and I'm working my way up towards the top left. So I've started with red and I'm just going in rainbow color order and going all the way up that panel. Now as I add each color, I like to use my ink blending tool to kind of mix the colors together back and forth. So I'll add the second color and then I'll go back with that first color that it's blending into and kind of use those together to make sure I get a really nice blend and I don't have any really harsh lines. You really want the color to be continuous. And then here's my favorite part, when we are all done with the inking and we get to remove that stencil and see this gorgeous background that we've created. So we have this beautiful geometric grid detail, and then we also have this great rainbow color. And like I mentioned before, we're going to trim it down and give it a nice finished stitched edge using the rectangle die from the Blueprints 13 Dynamics. And that's going to remove that little bit of white detail that we have on the side where we had the tape holding down our panel. And now here it is, our completely finished, beautiful rainbow background. I absolutely love it, and I can't wait to turn it into a card. But let's go ahead and set that one aside and start on our next background. So for this one, I'm going to use the circle burst stencil, and I'm positioning this right into the center of my panel. So I'm making sure that I have the center of the stencil positioned nicely right in the center, both vertically and horizontally, so that I get a really nice pattern that is the same all the way around our panel. So for this one, we're going to be creating a rainbow pattern once again, but I'm going to do this one a little bit different. I'm going to use 3 colors of distress inks rather than using the entire palette of the rainbow. So I'm starting off with my red color first, and I'm adding that right to the center of that stencil. And then I'm going in with my yellow and starting to mix that in as well. Now I did find as I was doing this technique, so I just want to mention it, that as I was adding the yellow kind of back and forth between the colors, I was kind of muddying up that yellow color. It was getting on my ink blending tool, it was kind of mixing with the reds and blues, and then I ended up kind of, you can see on my ink pad there, I have a little bit of red and blue kind of in that ink pad. I just kind of wiped the surface of it and it took it away no problem, so if that does happen, you can do that as well. So what I did is I went from red to yellow to blue on the stencil, and having those primary colors together created that fun rainbow pattern because when it mixed together, we also got the orange and the green detail in the middle. I do find that the colors are more subtle when you do the rainbow pattern this way versus using all of the individual ink colors. So if you are going for a more bright look, then I would definitely use all of the ink colors versus mixing the primary colors together to create the rainbow look. So now let's move on to our last panel. I have the abstract stencil here, and for this one we're going to create a rainbow pattern, but I'm going to start with my red in the middle and then work my way towards the top and bottom, creating a rainbow effect in each direction. So I started with the red first, and then I am just going to carry on with my orange, my yellow, my green, and my blue. I ended up running out of space before I got to purple. So if I was to redo this background, I would probably make my ink areas a little bit smaller just so that I could add all of those colors in. But I ended up liking it just the same. I think it's completely fine without the purple, and we still got this really fun rainbow effect. I'm going back through to make sure I have all of the colors completely blended before I remove the stencil because I don't want to have any harsh lines. And then once again, I'm going to remove that stencil and reveal our newest background that we've created. And it is just as beautiful as the first two. We have this great stencil detail, and then we have this beautiful rainbow color kind of starting in the center and working its way out towards the top and bottom of our panel. I did die cut both the second and third panel with that same rectangle die from Blueprints 13. And now we have three finished backgrounds that have stencil detail and also have the really great rainbow patterns on all three of them. So I just kind of like the different effects we were able to create. We created one full colored rainbow. We created a mix of primary colors to create the rainbow pattern on the second card. And then on the third card, we created the rainbow effect going from the center towards the top and bottom of that panel. So all the same idea, but just slightly different looks by changing up how we applied the ink through the different stencils. So now that we have all the backgrounds created, we need to turn these into cards. And this can be a little bit intimidating, I find, especially if you really want to leave the focus on the background. It's hard to decide what to do with the panel so that you kind of leave that whole background showing but still have some sentiment detail and image detail if you like to add that as well. So for my cards, I decided to add just sentiments. I'm not adding any images to these backgrounds. So for the first one here, I'm using the twice the thanks dynamics, and I'm using the word thanks here. This is one complete die, so you don't have to worry about piecing any of the letters together. And I've cut this out of black cardstock 3 times and layered one on top of the other just to give it a little bit of dimension. And now I'm positioning this right onto the background that we did with the geometric grid. And I like this one because it has the straight line detail, so we're able to line the sentiment right up on one of those rows and keep everything completely straight and uniform. For the next panel, I knew I wanted to concentrate my sentiment on the center because this is a nice circle pattern that kind of spreads out to all sides of the panel. So for this one here, I used the thanks and hello dynamics, and I die cut the word hello from some black cardstock. I also cut out a circle of vellum using the circle stacks dies just to kind of put underneath my sentiment to kind of help it stand out a little bit against that white and colorful background. And then I'm also using a sentiment from the Kind Words stamp set to add with that hello. So for the stamp sentiment, I'm going to stamp it with Versamark ink onto a strip of black licorice cardstock, and I'm going to heat emboss this with white embossing powder. I really love how bold the sentiment is when you use the white embossing powder over black cardstock. So I added that onto the strip there. I'm just heat setting it, and then I'm going to trim that down so that it fits underneath our word hello. Now I love the look of having a die cut word out of black cardstock and a strip of cardstock with the secondary sentiment kind of together so that they touch each other. I think it looks really neat on the finished design to kind of make it look like it's one continuous piece of cardstock by having both of those black cardstock pieces together. So what I'm doing is I'm adhering the hello first to my vellum circle, and I'm just kind of using my grid mat underneath of me to line that up and make sure it's straight. And then I'm going to adhere the secondary sentiment right over the bottom area of that word hello. And I'm making sure to overlap it in certain spots so that it all looks continuous. And then once I have that added on there, I can add adhesive onto the vellum piece in behind all of the letters where we're not going to see it. And then I can add that completed sentiment piece to the center of the panel. And I just used my T-square ruler to make sure I had everything lined up. So now we're left with this really fun, bold sentiment right in the center of our pattern. And we have the little bit of vellum in behind just to help it stand out a little bit more on the card. Now for our last sentiment, I decided to use a stamp sentiment rather than a die cut one. So I'm using the Birthday Speech Bubbles stamp set, and I'm going to stamp out the Happy Birthday to You speech bubble. I'm using my mini Misty just so I can double stamp this to get a really nice solid black image. And then I'm going to use the coordinating dies to go ahead and cut that out. So I'm left with this great speech bubble detail that has a little bit of white border around the outside edge, which really helps it to stand out on the card. Now for this one, I decided to add a little bit of string underneath my sentiment just to add something a little bit more to it, just some detail and dimension. So I added that first onto my panel, just kind of in a loopy mess. And then I'm adding that finished speech bubble over top with some foam adhesive. And that's just going to give it some really nice dimension. And since we've kept all of these card designs relatively flat and kind of simple, we didn't add a lot of detail because we have so much going on in the backgrounds, I did decide to add a little bit of sequins and jewels to each of the card designs just to give them a little bit more dimension and detail and just kind of add to that finished design. And once we have that done, we're left with these 3 great card designs that have really fun rainbow backgrounds that are the focus of the cards. If you would like to take part in today's activity, create a card using a fun, bold background in any color scheme. It can be rainbow or monochromatic, anything you like, and link it up in the blog post that I have down in the video description below. You can also leave a comment on this video for a chance to win a $15 gift card to the MFT online store, and we will see you tomorrow for more camp fun. Thanks for watching.